and I was tracking this deer, and I got up pretty high, and a little winded, and I sat down on a log, and I was looking down into the valley there, and the tracks had gone up behind me, and I got out a sandwich and started to eat the sandwich, and I heard this weird noise behind me.
Welcome back to another episode of Northwoods Whitetails podcast. This is part 2 to the Dell Green episode. If you guys missed part 1, go back to last week's episode and get caught up and then listen to this one. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy it.
And so I started going out, and in a little depression out in there, he was laying there. And I finished him off and got him. I was pretty happy, obviously, and so I'm all alone. So I got a long ways to go, but it's downhill. A little bit of this, but mostly all downhill. So I dragged and dragged. If you had to do that for a living, you would have left it,
Yeah.
True.
So I finally get down to the login road, and I pull the deer down into the edge of it, but, not quite to the road. It's not the road that I drove in on. So I got to go back through Budweiser Brook. A little too early for that, but let's get along towards afternoon by the time I got the deer out. So they're logging up this other road. So I get to my truck, drive about 7 miles down across this bridge, come up here, and I can hear they're logging. Well, I drive in and they're not logging. It's late. It's 4:30, 4:30. And it's a mechanic working on a feller buncher, and running it. And so he's French, and he doesn't speak any English, and I don't speak any French. So, I get out of the truck. He was polite. He stopped doing it. And I walk up to him, and I said, I shoot big buck. He goes, big buck, big buck. I said, yeah. I said, you don't, no lock gate, gate? And he goes, no lock. I said, okay. You, no lock, no lock. I said, thank you. So now I drive out this road, and I can't get the freaking deer in my truck. So I have a snatch block, and I went up into the woods 20 feet, and I put a rope around, and then I put a bigger rope on that, and I dragged the deer back up the bank with my truck. So then I tie it off, and I back my ass end down in the ditch, and now I got the buck loaded. I get my snatch block, hold up my rope. I'm pretty happy, I pull out of there. I drive down to the road, and the gate's locked.
Oh, no.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Guess he didn't understand.
My French wasn't very good.
He wasn't that nice of a guy then, as you thought.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
And I didn't have any help there. So I'll tell you one thing, when you see those little things that the locks are up inside, you're not going out. Mm. The best thing was that I swear it was like 3 a.m. The loggers came in.
Oh, so you stayed in the truck right there?
I didn't have any choice,
Yeah.
Miles and miles away.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
But I wasn't upset.
Yeah.
I tried to figure out ways I could get around that, and I even thought of going up. And I have a key to every skidder I've ever made in my truck. Mm-hmm. And I thought of doing that, but I couldn't see. The gate was in a perfect place, and it would have been difficult. There were trees, and it just that wasn't going to work. So I ruled that out. And
you obviously had food. Worst case, you had food in the back of the truck.
You know, I didn't have hardly anything but an extra chocolate bar or something. I went into a Quasic and weighed it the next morning, and I brought it back, and I took it down to the lake there. I was staying in a log cabin up in...
Parmacini.
Huh?
Parmacini.
Parmacini Lake. And I washed it all out good. I pulled it with my truck back up to the game pole, and I got it hung up. I just finished. It was my first year of hunting there. Don't know anybody. There was 7 camps on that whole lake, as big as Seymour, you know. It's locked, you know. I got to know everybody there. You got to know about the ribbon, the survey ribbon. Bring that up. So I'm just finishing tying the thing off, getting it, you know, up there, and down in comes a vehicle, and there was 2 older men in it, and they got out and came down. Ah, there it is. Yeah, well, you heard about that. I said, where'd you hear that? He said, well, we went to Oquasac. He said, you know, and we all do. We all want to see what was. Yeah. So you're the one that got it? Yeah. Boy, that's a beauty. He said, where's Coon? And I said, oh, they're not in. There's nobody here. You get that out alone? I said, yeah, I did. He said, well, I'm so-and-so, and this is so-and-so. I'm Del Green. He said, well, let me tell you something, lad. I thought he was maybe a little upset, a new guy in the chained-off area, you know, gated off. He said, we're kind of a tight-knit little community here. He said, don't you ever drag anything again. He said, we may be old, but we can still drag, or we'll get somebody that can. So from now on, you come get us when you need help. Promise? Friends, fellow hunters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and here I was nervous that they were going to, what were they going to do?
Yep.
What did I ask you to read?
The ribbon.
Okay,
Blue,
this is
blue ribbon?
yeah,
Survey ribbon.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Denny McGuire from New Hampshire, great guy, asked me if I wanted to go to that camp not that camp, but another camp at the end of the lake. It belonged to old Jim Emerson, who owned Emerson's store in...
Groveton.
Yeah. Anyway, so I could only go to the other camp for a week, so I can go to that one for 3 more if I want. Boy, I jumped all over that. So I go to the camp with him. There's about 8 people there, 2 or 3 old guys. One, Jim had Parkinson's disease. I don't know anybody, but after a while, you know somebody. And so I had a nice evening, and we all go to bed, and we get up, and most of us went off hunting. Denny said he was going someplace, and I told him I was going this other place. And if we don't show up, we can look for each other. So he goes where he's going to go, and I went across the river on this big bridge, and 100 yards up the road, there's a big track. Nowhere's near where I was going to go, and it's headed uphill. I got out and looked at it. I said, holy shit. So I parked my truck. I take after the deer. And the deer squeezed me into the river. I knew it was going to happen. And when I got up in where there was no recourse, the deer went across. So took my pants and underwear and boots and stuff off, got across the river, got on the other side. I got this down to a pat. I take my flannel shirt off, wipe myself off, all of that. And I get dressed, and I go up onto the road, and I'm going to walk down the road to the bridge. No, I'm going to follow the deer. That's right. So I get up there, and Denny's truck's parked right there. And son of a bitch. So I go up a little ways. He's on the deer. Well, okay. So I go back down. I had a whole roll of fluorescent pink survey ribbon. So I tied 250 feet of it all over his pickup, from the trailer hitch to the bumpers to the door handles to the windshield wipers, 250 feet, fluorescent pink. So I leave, and so I go hunting. You're not going to believe this. I go up on the peaks, and I shoot an 8-point buck, right at dark, walking off. So I got it out, leave it there, and I'm late, real late. And I get back to camp, and everybody's back there. And so I walk in, and Denny's about your height. I walk in, and he had told me, when you come back hunting, old Jim wants a story. And don't just tell him you didn't see anything today. He wants to know where you went. He can't hunt. What we share with him is his day. So you're good at that. So tell him that you saw 4 squirrels and whatever. Tell him something. I said, okay. So I came in. Denny didn't see me at first, and I saw Jim, and so I started to go towards him. And I don't know these guys. Denny jumps up and comes over, and he gets right in my face, like you would to me, but right here. And, you little son of a bitch. I said, what? You know what? I said, of course, they all know. So, what? You know what you did? I said, I don't know what you think talking about putting that freaking ribbon all over my truck. It took me an hour to take it all off. I said, you got ribbon all over your truck? Yeah, you ought to know. You put it there. I said, Denny, this morning when we left, we told each other where we were going in case we got hurt or lost or something. We could find each other. And I said, I didn't go. Did you go where you said you were going? Yeah. I said, well, I went to Thrasher Peaks. He goes over to this kid. The first time he's been to camp, too, with a friend, older friend. Started in on him. He's denying it. Yeah, I get rid of him. So that would be the end of this? No. Those stick-on bullet holes, you need to have some. Second to your rifle, don't forget the bullet holes. So the next day, we got to go get my deer, right? Mm-hmm. So we get the deer, and we come back to camp and stuff, and we hang it up, and I don't know, it's noon or something. I thought, well, I'm going bird hunting. So I took off to go bird hunting, and I'm scouting. I come back, and I see Charlie Hatfield's his name. There's a hunting family over in New Hampshire. The kid's truck that Charlie's with is parked, and so it's dark. So I go by it, and they're not out of the woods yet, and I know they're down by the lake, and if they're coming, they're going to have their little flashlights, something on. So I go back in the dark, and I rub off a little spot in the back quarter panel, and I put one of them bullet holes on. So then I walk back, and I go to camp. So about 20 minutes after I'm at camp, in comes Charlie. The kid's not in yet. So old Jim says, well, what'd you see today, Charlie? Charlie said, well, I didn't see too much till we got back to the truck. What do you mean? He says, somebody put a bullet right through Danny's pickup, right through the back end. Really, everybody jumps up. Of course, I jumped up, All but old Jim, we run down to the truck, and there's this big old yellow yard light, old antique thing. It's not very bright. There's a big generator running there. So we all looked at it, We're all, son of a bitch. Right off, they're blaming this camp across the lake.
Oh, no.
It had to be them. And then they're mad. They're like, it wouldn't be anybody else here. Them sons of bitches, this is it. So they're really mad. So they go back inside, and they're debating how to handle this, So all of a sudden, in comes the kid. And somebody said, Dan, we think we know what's going on here, and we'll get your truck repaired, and we know who's paying for it. He goes, well, there's not a lot of repair. Why is that? Well, I got to wondering where that bullet came out, so I went around the other side, and there's no bullet hole. And there's no bullet hole in my tailgate. There's no bullet hole. And I went back and looked at that, and there's just a fake bullet hole. Denny McGuire, he gets right up again. He comes over to me. You little son of a bitch. We never had any problems in this camp, ever, for 40 years until you came here.
That's good.
Should be the end of the story. I stayed a few more days than the coon, and the other guys came to the other camp, and so I'm going to move down there. And so I went and did something, maybe with my Jeep. Doesn't matter. I come back, and I had a big cooler and a small cooler on the porch. Well, it was in a porch, and they were out on. I had put them out on the deck in the morning, and so I went to put them in the back of my truck. So I went to lift them, and I can't lift them, and I thought, oh, they screwed them to the deck, So I opened the cover, and full of rocks about that big. I mean, it weighed 100-something pounds. I opened the little one. There's no pots and no food or anything. So I walk in the shed, and all my food was there. So the old man and the old man's friend were inside. And at one time when I opened the cover, I glanced up, and they were in the window, but they're just like little kids,
Ducking.
So I took care of my stuff, put it in my truck, and then I went in to thank them for letting me stay there and everything. And and we shook hands, and I got over by the door. I said, "Hey, you wouldn't know how the hell all those rocks could have ever got in those coolers." And old Bob Kidder said, "Yeah, I know." So now I'm finding out. I said, "So who was it? Not a person. Those are rock birds." I said, "We have some big rock birds around here, and they do that all the time." I said, "Really? Where do those rock birds come from?" He goes, "Well,
Rocks.
they've been known to come. A lot of them come from around Whitefield, New Hampshire." So then I knew it was Charlie Hatfield. Okay, so I said goodbye and laughed and got in my truck, drove down the driveway, started to go, and I hear something in my truck, and it sounded like a branch on your universal joint, I got out, and I just looked up under the truck, and, I laid down. I can't see anything, so I get in the truck, and I backed up kind of careful. I don't hear it. And I pull ahead again. So I start to go again. I can hear it again. Son of a bitch. So I get out, and I walk around the back of the truck, and there's a rope there with about 30 beer cans tied to it. Somebody else was at that camp. And when I was in doing my thing, he did that. I never have found out who it was. So,
Maybe this will bring it forward.
uh-oh.
That's pretty good.
That is good.
That's pretty good.
Let me see if I got another one. Okay. Oh, boy. Hey, we're getting through these.
There.
Yeah.
How about the working with the state to start muzzleloading season? You had a big part of that for the state of Vermont, right?
Yeah. We had been going, that Vermont Fish and Wildlife Conservation Group that we have formed in the Northeast Kingdom, and a lot of people in Island Long Pond belong to it. We built a fish hatchery in Morgan. That was my baby, and I went to the state and got people involved, and we rebuilt that hatchery, and we put fingerlings out. The state gives them to us, but we rebuilt the whole hatchery, and it belongs to our club. And in the spring, we put it in the papers and stuff, and we'd like to have kids involved in it. So, you've done that?
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, my old man went and got some from you guys and brought my boy who's 3 years old.
Good.
Yep. They released him in our beaver pond.
So that's always been something I'm a little proud of.
Yeah.
Especially when some of my friends said you'll never pull that off. So then we, as a group, not as a group, but say 3 or 4 of us, Willard Taft. Anyway, we went to Montpelier several years. Willard and I were hunting in New Hampshire and for years, and tried to get the state to start a muzzleloader season, and they would have none of it. And so next year we went again. The next year we went again, and everybody gave up. So the next year, I got a hold of Brian Smith's father, is Kerm Smith. He was the sergeant at arms in the State House. So I'm leaving some things out, but I made a deal with him that I wanted to come in. Would he get me a meeting with the Fish and Wildlife Board members? So he said he would, and he did. And so I went down and I brought 2 muzzleloaders, but in cases. And he said, come up to the State House, the side door at 10 o'clock. So at 9:30, I'm at the door, but it's pretty obvious I got guns. So I stood them up there and stayed and stood there. It was like a half an hour late. I was early to begin with. And so finally, lots of people seemed to be coming out, but everybody'd look at the guns and look at me and pick up speed. Finally, somebody going in, after a couple of times I said, excuse me, and they just look and keep going. Finally, somebody stopped, and I told him what I just told you, and that could he try to find Kerm Smith for me. So 5 minutes later, Kerm came, and he'd forgotten about it. But he hadn't forgotten the meeting. He'd lined that up. So he took the guns, and I followed him up to this meeting, and there was, 7 people there. And there were 2 or 3 women on the meeting, on the board. And so they knew I was coming. And what really happened is somebody had told one of them, and they had a fear of these muzzleloaders blowing up if you shot and then poured powder down the breech too soon, they would blow up and injure or kill people. Well, that probably happened during the Civil War, but so anyway, I found that out. So I went and put on a big spiel about the whole thing, but I had done some homework and I'd gotten a lot of info from New Hampshire. So, similar states, and the income they were deriving from their muzzleloader season alone was a big help to their department. And so I had the figures. So, between that and me convincing them nobody was going to die with this, and it's a great sport, and it's kids, everything like that. And I was, the kids things like that, you can downcharge these things so they hardly kick. Kids can use them. So, anyway, they passed it.
And that was in 1989?
Something like that.
Roughly? Yeah.
So I was always kind of proud of that.
Yeah.
But here's something I'm more proud of. When the feds and the state were in looking at buying the big lands up here, I'm wondering if I should tell this story.
Was this when Champion owned the land?
Yes.
Or was gonna sell it off? Yeah.
I was asked to be on the panel. I believe there was 12 of us, and I think we met for 10 months, and I think it was once a month. And a number of us that were there were trying to save the lands for what we'd always used it for, snowmobiling, recreation, hunting, fishing, and everything. And we weren't winning. Little by little, we knew we weren't getting anywhere. They were going to close roads, and they wouldn't promise to leave anything open, and it was very frustrating. So on my way to Montpelier, I back up a little bit. My father was the head of the state police up here. Saying, we have a camp. We're wondering what's going to happen. Everybody was on pins and needles about this. The camp ownership was a big item. So my dad was a big but quiet man. He asked me how I was doing down there, and I told him about what I told you. And he said, son, you got one meeting left. I said, yeah. He said, do you remember which way, by order of Robert's rules, when you start taking testimony, did they go from left to right or right to left? Because technically and legally you have to go opposite the next meeting. Well, I knew that, but forgot about it. But I've been chair, president of clubs and stuff, and so I knew that. I said, yeah. He said, you know which way it went last time? Well, you should because you remember where you were sitting. I said, yeah. So he should go the other way. I said, well, yeah. He said, you get your butt down there way before everybody else, and you sit in that chair next to Ron Reagan. Remember the commissioner?
Mm-hmm.
He was chairing that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was down there an hour early. Instead of milling out in the yard the area, I went in and sat down. The lady that was kind of overseeing it for the land trust, I knew her well, but I'll leave that out of it for now. She was sitting opposite me. So they took final testimony from all of us. It was quite long. And it got to me, and I said, well, I knew Ron. He said, well, Del, you're the last one here, and then I guess these testimonies are over, so you're up. I said, well, some of you are going to like this, and some of you aren't, but we've banded together, and we've raised, what do you call it when you, an attorney, you...
Hired.
Well, okay, hired, but retained an attorney.
Retained.
And I said, so we get $10,000 pledged for that, and so we already got a retainage. Well, Sally, she stood up, and she was mad. And I mean, she was leaning over the table yelling mad. And everybody was looking at me going like this. And so one of the things she said was, do you have any idea, Del, of the amount of money it would take to fight this and hold this whole thing up for months at a time? And I said, oh, we do. She says, well, I don't think you do. And I said, you know what you don't know, Sally? These camps aren't owned by a bunch of bums. These camps are people that are from all walks of life. There's doctors and dentists and attorneys, big oil company owners, businessmen from everywhere, and yes, some of the lesser. But I said, I got pledges for over $100,000 or whatever I need. And so that's the way it is. Well, she blew up. And Ron was trying to calm her down, and she was screaming mad, and he called a recess, and we went out, and they had the governor's secretary was there. I'm being very careful here. He was at all the meetings, taking the minutes of the meetings and stuff. And so I knew him well. He actually was in on a camp a mile from ours. So anyway, he came over to me. Well, oh, wait.
Sorry.
He tried to start the meeting again, Ron did, and it failed in 1 minute. And she was just screaming mad. So he adjourned. I don't know what we're going to do. I'll get in touch with you people. And so we went out in the hall, and this guy came to me and asked if I would go see the governor. And I said, yeah, I'll go anytime. And he said, could you go now? I said, I'll go right now. He said, okay, well, I just got to call and tell him that you are coming. I said, call him. So he did. So we went to Montpelier. We were in Waterbury. And we got over there, and we had to wait a long time in what I took to be his office. A long time. But they have an itinerary, So he finally came in, and it was Governor Dean. Mm-hmm. And we stood up, and he glared at me. And he walked around and then he said, what do you want? Not in those words. He was mad. And I said, well, in all due respect, sir, you should know because he's been taking the minutes of these meetings right along. And he said, well, I don't know what happened there, today. And so, well, he had told him. So the attorney thing wasn't true. I'd made that up. But nobody knows that,
Right.
only me.
Mm-hmm.
So we did not have a campers association. So I told him what I wanted and everything, and he told that guy to write these things up, and he was, and he said, get it typed up on the legal paperwork and call me back. So we waited, and this lady came in, and we went over things, and I spent quite a while, the wording, an hour. And she was very nice, and she went and typed it up, brought it back. And the funny thing was, this guy that I didn't care a lot for, he was a fellow hunter. Whether he was ethical or not, he was a hunter, so that didn't hurt.
Yeah.
He didn't want to lose his camp either. So, okay, one thing led to another. Finally, the governor came back, and he looked it over fast. I knew he didn't read it. And then he signed it. And he said, are you satisfied, And I said, not really. I said, I'd like, there's 3 lines there underneath yours, and I'd like at least 2 witnesses. And I said, and I'd like and they need to be somebody that both you and I approve. He threw his suit coat, I swear to God. He threw it, and he tried to throw it in a chair, and it missed. It went on the floor. He walked over, and he kicked his coat. He turned around, and he was not happy. I didn't trust him. So I got, the thing was in session, I got our representative and our senator from the Northeast Kingdom. They were there in 15 minutes. So now I had what I wanted, and they signed it. They read it.
Mm-hmm.
They were for it too.
Sure.
He probably knew that, but he left. So everybody patted me on the back, and out the door I go. Well, I didn't go very far because I knew I got to have a camp association real fast. Nancy, who was the guy that I called? He was an attorney, and he was a...
You owned a camp down on Madison Brook or somewhere down there?
what do you call it?
He was a lobbyist.
A lobbyist in Montpelier. So I called him. I knew him, and I told him just what I told you. He said, "Oh, we got to do this fast. We need," and he stuttered and said, "It's like a chain letter. We got to do it by phone. We got to have something by tomorrow." And he said, "So I'm going to get a hold of various people. You get a hold of various people. We need every camp owner we can get, and get all the information to me, and I'll take care of it." Well, I'm not very smart, but I got to thinking, why don't I just go on St. Regis champion leasee holders? Well, in minutes I had every name I wanted and phone numbers. So we did the phone number thing with other people were helping me and stuff in 2 days.
Had it locked up, and
Yeah.
that's good.
No kidding.
Yeah, they've done very little of it, but if they were to pull a culvert, then you've lost access to that land. So any culvert I wanted to be replaced. It could not be unreplaced. And same with bridges. I know now we have lost a little bit, but very marginal. So
Yeah.
that's my story.
It is.
Yep.
That's why I tell people I'm a professional liar.
It worked, Bill. It worked.
Yeah.
It saved,
You know?
it saved it for a lot of people.
You essentially saved, well, in my opinion, what's
Oh, my
actually the
God.
Northeast Kingdom, right? To me,
Well,
that is the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah, it was a great feeling. And a lot of people knew that. And if I hadn't, I don't know what ever made me think of that driving down there. It was just, what can I do? What can I do? Money. Money talks. And then before I got there, I had a plan.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Huh.
I thought you might like that one.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Hey, hey. Hey, hey, man.
So, what was your thought like when Champion sold a lot of that land? I mean, it was cut off, right? But when the feds bought it, I mean, did anybody know that it was going to go the way that it is now? I mean, that land is pretty well, I don't want to say useless, but it is to
It is.
wildlife. It really is. And
Yeah.
there's nothing it seems like anybody can do about it.
We never had coyotes, and they hurt our herd so bad. We never had a problem till the coyotes came, and then deeper into the woods there. And you guys get around a lot. I don't know if you have, but I've seen coyote kills fresh. Not a lot of them, but when we're walking out of the woods in the dark, which we all do, right then, that transition, they pick up and then another, and then they find each other, and they gang up on it. And I've seen it happen. I've been in with my Jeep somewhere and turn around and come back out and have a deer laying in the road there, and tracks everywhere, and you come back in the morning and you know what's left.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's really hurt us. But I think the logging practices as they are today have ruined the landscape. We can't hunt where they go,
Yeah.
and
There's nobody to police them. They don't police them anymore.
There's,
Well,
you meaning that they're not policing themselves. They're more about the money and
Yeah, but somebody should be.
yeah.
well, you can't do that, man. That's their land, and they're going to log it in the most efficient way that they can. We don't own it, but now leaving the tops and deliming in the woods.
Most of it's such a mess. You cannot walk through it. Some of these companies are,
It's
like you
so
say,
bad.
no policing or no, not a care in the world other than the money that's pulling out of the woods. The rest of it's.
Yeah, it's sad.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that hurt us a lot is when there was no money in chipping anymore. The big mills gave up on the chipping. I would imagine that monetarily it wasn't working.
Yeah.
And so when they couldn't chip, all that stuff that used to leave us with the woods, we could go through. Even if it meant going just through it to get over to the elevation you wanted to hunt, that's discouraging.
Yeah.
And it'll never be what you've seen.
Yeah.
Probably ever.
Yep. It's same with a lot of that state land that's in there.
Yeah.
It's useless now.
I know
It's
it.
and
It's not, we're talking deer here, but there's a lot of people that we all love to go bird hunting, but there are people that are dedicated bird hunters and with their bird dogs, and they can't go there
yeah.
anymore.
The just birds don't thrive there.
Yeah. Ask Mike Green. There's no way he's going to take his beagles out there to chase rabbits.
Yep.
And so it's changed their life a little. He's a fanatic rabbit hunter.
Yeah, it's definitely a trickle down effect there. So I was talking with somebody that'll be on this podcast eventually, but he was a forester, and he's saying essentially that the federal level is getting sued and the state level for areas that they want to cut. The state wants to cut, or the feds want to cut.
Yeah.
There's lawsuits against them so that they're held up in court so that they cannot cut it.
Really?
Yep, and it's more people that are worried about their views or looking at the trees than
Yeah.
what's actually good for the habitat.
Oh, here's a cool story. One day I was hunting up on the mountain at home here in Vermont, and I was tracking this deer, and I got up pretty high, a little winded, and I sat down on a log, and I was looking down into the valley there, and the tracks had gone up behind me, and I got out a sandwich and started to eat the sandwich, and I heard this weird noise behind me, and so I really slow turned around, and I don't see anything. After a minute or two, I took another bite of my sandwich. I turned around, sat back down. Then I heard it again. What what the hell? So I turned around again, and this time I stood up, and there's a bobcat on another log that had fallen the other way, and he was standing on the log. And I don't do anything. My gun's down here. So I want to see him a little better, so I step. He's looking away from me. I step over here a little ways. Now I can see him really good. And then, 2-3 minutes later, I could see him. He let out that kind of a scream again, And when he did that, this buck comes up out of his bed behind him. And there's some more racks out on the porch. There's one of them. I think it weighed 202. And it had almost no teeth left in it. The old game warden when I brought it out. So anyway, I shoot it, and pretty happy. I was young. So I left the deer up there, T-shirt deal. Went back to camp. My dad, they wanted to go get it, but it was way up on the mountain. You get hurt doing that. So we got up early in the morning, and we all went up. My father, my brother Bobby, and his friend Billy Lucas. And they were teenagers, 17, 18. So we finally get up to it, and I don't mind telling you where it was. If you were down at Lewis Pond looking up on that mountain, it was quite far up on that mountain. So the boys grabbed an antler, each one of them, and it was steep, and they started to go down. There was quite a lot of snow. And my dad, who never talked a lot, he'd give me a little elbow, and I looked at him and he said, "Watch this. Keep your eyes on this." Well, they went about 30 feet, and then they tripped, and they went down, and the buck came in, piled into one or two of them, and Billy Lucas there, he let out a big yell, and the deer tines, and I'm sure it left a mark in him because he was kind of hurt. So they rolled over and got out from under the buck. We laughed, and my father gave him a lesson in pulling a deer down the hill. And actually, my dad went back to our camp because we had to get a truck to go all the way around and get it. So it's the buck butt in the behind buck.
So you had a set of antlers in here that I want you to tell the story of. There's that 10-pointer hanging in the other room, just the skull mount that your mom had got.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of one of my favorites because I was probably a 14-year-old boy, and we were down in Bridgewater hunting in an area called Chattagee, and my uncle and my dad had a hunting camp there, and one morning they got up and they were putting on this sort of an organized hunt. We didn't have any snow, and my mother liked to hunt, and she hunted on her own quite a bit, and or some anyway, and so we heard a shot, and so my brother who was with me, he was younger, but we finally found them, and everybody was trying to find where this deer went, and we hunted the rest of the day and couldn't find it, and the next morning my uncle wanted to do it in a grid thing, and so we did that, and we never found the deer, and it was the end of the season, and so we packed up and went home either that day or the next, but my uncle went up in there, I think it was the day after, and he found the deer. It was never weighed, but the deer was ruined, but he got the skull and antlers, and it was a really, really nice deer. And the cool thing is she shot it with a single shot 20 gauge shotgun with a slug.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. It's pretty nice buck.
Nice heavy horns.
Yeah, sure is. Sure
I had
is.
a lot of fun growing up down there. One time, my uncle, who I worship so much, he had a Model A. I have a picture of it out here. And a rumble seat. So my dad shot this buck up on the mountain, and I was about 14. And so we converge on it, and so they're going to go down and get the Spud. The Spud was the Model A. So I sit down, and it's getting dark, and I stay there with the deer, and they don't come, and about an hour and a half later they show up, and they've been in the wobble water, and so they finally get the deer picked up. It was like a 6-pointer, and into the rumble seat, but hanging out both sides, and that's where I rode. 2 big men, there's no room for a third kid in that. So I get up in the rumble seat on top of the deer, and going down through that old road, it was like a Jeep, that thing. It had chains on the back wheels. We got down by our camp. It's like, whew, I made it, and they don't stop. So they keep going up the valley to this guy's camp that was a friend of theirs. His name was Bill Safko. He was from Massachusetts. And he was a nice guy. So we get up there, and of course they all come out to see the deer and shake hands and have a beer, and another beer and another beer. And finally, Bill Safko said, "You want a beer?" He looked at my dad, and I guess he's old enough. So he gave me a beer. Oh, that's cool. So they're talking, shooting the shit. Nobody's had anything to eat. It's 8 o'clock now. And so Bill goes by me and went, "Yeah, have another one." Oh, okay. Well, I remember being really dizzy and kind of wondering, is this wrong? It's got to be the beer. But I was a little bit scared. And then, so my dad and uncle decided to go back to the camp, so we went outside. And my dad always told the story that I was wobbling. That they picked me up and put me in the back, and they probably did. So I sat and laid on that deer, and the road to our camp was horrible. We got to camp, and I was sick to my stomach. Then I didn't want my dad or my uncle to know that, but I got off of the Model A, and when they were getting the deer out and they weren't looking, I ran around the back of camp and threw up. I wasn't as happy about the deer as they were.
No, didn't agree with you.
That's funny. That Budweiser Brook that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Is there more of a story to it than that, or just somebody leaving a 6-pack?
No, I wanted a trail through the woods to go to this other logging road, and it was probably 3/4 of a mile.
Yeah.
But we liked to hunt up in there, and you're always coming back different ways, and it was so in the fall. Hot, nice October day, and I don't know if she was with me or not, but a backpack and my small chainsaw, and I made a path through there the best way I thought, and then by the brook, I had my backpack with a couple of beers in it, or one probably so I put the beer in there in the brook, probably one, and when I came back through, I was all sweaty, and boy, this is nice. I should have some in here for deer season. So I didn't finish the thing that day. So when I went back, I brought 2 6-packs of beer and put them in the brook.
No kidding.
And it didn't last long. I know one or the other of us would put one in there once in a while.
Yeah.
But it was, actually, it was probably only 300 yards from the truck where we had that. So that's how it got its name.
Yep. Huh. That's pretty funny.
Let me just look here.
So many stories, he's got to write them down.
Oh, Jesus. My wife, she was so helpful. And one year, I don't know if I had my ankle operation or what it was, but you helped me put the tree stand up. The one I shot the deer, and the warden came, and she helped me because I was having a hard time with I think it was my ankle. And so I put up a tree stand. And again, I like those when I've hunted somewhere, and in the last hour of the day, sometimes I go do those. Or lots of times other guys use them too, So I go back, I go to that stand, and I got a deer, and But in the course of snow on the ground, and later on, I realized that the stand wasn't in really the best place. And I figured out why afterwards, so I moved the stand 75 yards and put it up again. And this never happens to me, but I got another deer out of it. So that's rare. So then I never really hunted there a lot. Down over that bank, that little ridge, there was a big string of beaver dams. It's swampy. Well, I followed tracks down in there, and I found where the deer were getting through. So I moved the tree stand again. And I didn't move it till late in the day that year because we had snow. And so I moved it, got it all set up. But unlike, I always put my tree stands in fir trees so you can camouflage. There was no fir trees, so I reluctantly put it up in a maple tree, about that big. And there were some fir trees behind it, but it's the only thing that was going to work. But there were deer coming from another way that I didn't know before, because before there was probably bare ground. So I moved the stand, and I get it all set up, and it's like 2:30, and I'd gone back and forth 100 yards here or whatever and stunk it all up. So I go back to my truck and drove around to this other area. No secret there, Black Cat Brook. I went over there and had a place I liked. And so I get out of my truck and, Jesus, I'd like to be in that. I jumped back in and raced back over there, and it was cold, very cold. And I hiked down in there, and I had a wicker backpack and heavy coveralls. And when I always fix my blinds up really nice with branches hanging around and stuff. And why I did this, I don't know. But right here, I had cut off a branch about that big and probably stuck out about 14 inches or something. And I fell out of a tree stand once. So I started using a safety harness. And I had two of them. One was in my truck, and one is at the other place I was going to go. Didn't even think of it. I go down there, put my coveralls on, tie my gun to this rope. It's not loaded. I go up, put my gun up. I did have a little railing thing I'd made. That's all. I leaned the gun there, and I rolled the rope up like this. No, wait a minute. I put the gun over that stick where you can reach it real easy, Not. Then I coil up the rope, put it right over the same stick. Then I sit back, and I'm sure some other people do this, I don't know, but I always found it difficult for me to sit because I get so bored. And so I started reading my father's, he had a huge box of old Zane Grey Westerns. So I would bring them and my little half glasses, and I would read a little bit, but, 2-3 paragraphs, then I'd look around. And I could sit there for 2 hours. Well, I'm sitting there with it's cold, so my hands are sort of into the coveralls a little bit, and my half glasses on, and I look around, and it's getting close to the dark. So that's when I would always put my book up. But I think it must have been close to the OK Corral or something was really good because I didn't put the book down. But I turned a page and looked up, and there's a buck standing right in front of me from here to the porch steps. I come right across 100-yard clear cut.
Never saw one.
And when I did this, I think he saw me. Switch pages. And it was like eye contact, and he bolts. But this path came down, and he heads for me to go under my tree. I dropped the book. The rope that I cranked up, I tied it around my waist, tied it around the tree, and then did this. So I went to get up, and I can't, shit. So now I turn around, and the buck's gone by my tree, and I'm right-handed, so this isn't working. I pull the gun up, and the coil of rope's half on that, and the deer's getting away. I get the rope all off, And I lean down here, and I can't get it in the scope, and it's going straight away. Holy shit, my glasses. I pull my glasses off, just throw them. Now I'm leaning out here like this. The stock of my gun's right here. There's no... I'm leaning right out like this, and I shot, and the gun comes back. I almost dropped it. It goes right by me, and I catch it like this, and then I'm hanging off my seat, and I can't get my feet up enough to get up onto this. What do I do? Anyway, eventually, without losing my gun and everything, I got back up on there, and I sat down, and I laughed. And I honestly laughed. I know I laughed out loud. And I remember saying, boy, talk about somebody from wherever, New Jersey, Boston or something, coming up here. I thought, boy, if anybody ever saw this. So anyway, well, I get down all my stuff, take my coveralls off, put them in my backpack. Said, well, I better just go over there. You never know. Dead.
No kidding.
I swear on her life. Right up the butt.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I am total shocked. So I want to tell everybody, nobody there, so I gut it out. So I take my backpack and my coveralls up to my truck, which wasn't far away, a quarter of a mile. And I took all my stuff up and so I wouldn't be carrying a gun in my backpack and stuff. And there's a game warden sitting behind my truck. Actually, I saw his headlights come in through the trees while I was gutting it out. And I became friends with a game warden up there that I liked a lot, but it wasn't him. And he accused me of shooting the deer in the dark after hours, and I didn't. And we had a verbal exchange. And he was going to take my rifle and my gun and my deer. And I basically said, what proof have you got that I did anything? I didn't do anything wrong anyway, but what proof? I mean, there's other hunters around. I don't know where you were and heard this shot, but I never heard any shots after dark. And so I'm going after my deer, and my gun's going home with me. So he said, you're resisting arrest. And I don't know if you want to take this out of this thing or not, but I said, you know what? You don't know me. You don't know where I've been or what I've done or who I am. I wouldn't suggest that you try to take my gun. And I'm going to be polite about it. But if you want to go to the hospital, you make your decision. And he put it like this with his hand. I knew he was after his mace. And I said, stupid decision, friend. You're seconds away from making a horrible decision. I'm going after my deer. And I turned around and walked off, and he drove away.
No kidding.
Yeah.
He was just looking to pester somebody.
You know what? That guy and I had other run-ins, and I never had done a thing wrong.
Wow.
He kept checking me and checking me and checking me, and one day I blew up at him, for the same thing. And one day, like 3 years later, he thought I was with some guys, my friends, who were, you can't party hunt in Maine, right? You can't drive deer and stuff. Thought that they were doing that, and I was part of that. I came out of the woods where they started, and I picked up a friend's truck and drove it around. And a friend of mine, Pete, took me up to get my truck, and I drove back right when he showed up. Anyway, there's more to it. Years later, 5 years, I went to open the gate up to go into Parmigiani on the left side of the lake. It was in the fall. And he drove up, and there was another man with him, turned out to be his brother. And I had drove through, and I was swinging the gate shut. And so I saw him, so I said, you going through? He said, yeah, we are. So I swung it back open. I said, go ahead, I'll get it. So he came walking up and said, back for another year, huh? He was very friendly. I said, yeah. Heard you got a good one last year. Yeah, I got lucky. He said, what was it? And we talked about it. So he says, well, I'm going to go on my way. I said, his name. I said, how would you like it if we pretend we never met each other ever before? And we started off brand new today. And he looked at me and he stuck his hand out. We shook hands and we became good friends.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually, after I had a chance to more explain what I told you,
Yeah.
and he believed me.
Yeah.
And in the course of time, I found an illegal moose somebody shot, and I led him to it and gave him an idea who I thought it was, because I knew who was hunting in there, and it was. And then also a dead doe, and I don't know how that came about. And a third time, a guy that shot a doe in front of some friends of ours during deer season. They didn't have any antlers, so they jumped in the truck and took off. But we found out who it was, but I did, and so we became good friends. And sometimes you don't know who your friends are until you give it a chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep. Definitely.
Good advice.
Why do you think there's such really good hunters around this area, like the Northeast Kingdom? Because there's like your book, right? There's some really good people, experienced woodsmen from this area.
Boy, I was going to say maybe it's the big woods that they have, but there's a lot of big woods down, Moscow.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing them out, and
Yeah.
down where we grew up, and the chain of mountains. You know what? You suppose some of it could have been the fact that we would have snow up here when the rest of the state didn't have it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember going in to camp, and there'd be no snow in Island Pond, and you get up like the second road, going up towards Lewis Pond, and we'd always see it. And then we'd get up to camp, and we'd have 2-3 inches. And you could be up hunting and look off, and it was bare.
Yeah.
Maybe that both of those reasons a little bit.
Yeah.
But is it?
There's way less deer for sure in this country, but
It can be awfully frustrating.
yeah.
I see it today with friends that come to my camp. And
I think a lot of it came from being the type of country that we have up here. And if they wanted to eat and survive, they had to learn how to hunt in these woods.
I don't think it would help the ones in the big woods, though.
Well,
It's a good point you make, but yes, you knew how you grew up, and that was.
That's exactly how I grew up.
Yeah, I know.
I will say that I do agree with you in that sense of things, Nancy, because if you look back to the folks who lived in the big woods that solely hunted for the purpose of filling their freezers, they were trackers, right? Like that is the most successful method in the big woods, right? There's a deer in front of you. You got to catch up to that deer and shoot him.
Yeah.
So maybe that woodsmanship skill is a little bit stronger in that sense within this.
What do you think on that? Your father was an outstanding hunter. Your family was, so.
I sort of believe that's exactly what you guys are talking about. The lower amount of deer that we have up here, it forces you to become a better hunter.
That's a good point.
I think that's what I saw and as I got to travel to other parts of the country, when we ended up out in Ontario, there was bucks everywhere,
Yeah.
and you didn't have to hunt as hard as we did here in Vermont, northern Vermont.
Yeah.
And it was like that in other places, Kansas, and that's what I believe, but I don't know for sure.
It definitely has something to do with work ethic, right? Like some of these guys, we were talking about a mutual friend earlier who used to work for you and how good of a worker he was,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And he's very successful deer hunting because of that work ethic, right?
Yeah, that I just totally agree with you, because it's such a hard job.
Yep.
Well, that was the only way I mean, deer was they were part of our diet. It was a staple, and all year long, because we were not very affluent at all. Hey, my dad's dead. You going to arrest him now?
No, it's true.
I
don't think if you were somehow, none of my family was very successful at all over it. So what's the difference there? 3 brothers. My brother Bobby, wicked work ethics. So much so that it was more important than hunting.
Did he ever get the chance to hunt, really?
Yeah, he was a good hunter and he was a good shot. And he shot a few deer, but his priority was he never spent a week hardly. You know, he'd go to Maine with us in later years, and he often came home a little early.
Yeah.
Because it was work. He had 6 carpenters working for him, and he'd get nervous, you know. But I think what you said probably you're right. You know, I hadn't thought of it that way. Before you met, how did you hunt?
How did I hunt?
Yeah.
I grew up around guys like Terry Spear.
Oh.
Right?
Yes.
Eric Adams, the Carl Bakers. I knew of the David Tolmans and reading your book and, hearing Will Stats and many more, right? The Benoits, right? They lived just down the road. 15 minutes down the road from me. I used to shoot shotguns with Lanny, and it was the most impressive thing you'd ever seen before. I mean, I grew up in that environment, right? And I didn't really turn into a deer hunter until I was, 17, 18 years old. We always did it as a weekend warrior type of thing.
Sure.
But I had mutual friends whose father spent time in the big woods, and I saw the bucks that he was bringing home, and he gave me a chance with him to go to these places, right?
Oh.
And his influence and him taking the time to take me is instantly what got me there, right? And once I succeeded once, I just came back for more and more and more, right? Like anybody would do, like we all do.
Yes.
And even those failed experiences, I guess those light the fire even more, right? The ones that you miss, the big bucks that you don't get, or the ones that you never catch up to.
Yeah.
It's always
failed
on the back
experiences.
Of your mind.
My Uncle Gordon, we had this in Bridgewater. We had this hill in the mountains there, this hill, and it was called Cobble. There was a settlement in there in the old days, and the fever or something wiped them, yellow fever, something.
Yeah.
There was an old schoolhouse called the Seal Bid. The chalkboards were in there, all falling down near our camp. And there was a community of farmers. There was patches of apple trees all over, and chimneys in the woods now. But we always seemed to get a deer or two off Cobble. There was an escape route on the back side of it, so if the guys would come here and push up to the top, so they would take somebody who didn't have a deer and, okay, your turn to go to the sit. So I'm like 14 or 15, and Uncle Gordon said, well, Del, you know how to get to where we're going to end up. That's your day. And my father said, and rightfully so, no. He'll have his day when he gets older. And my uncle, who ran things at the camp, said, no, he's going. So can you find it? Yeah. You know where we nestle in to sit there by those little firs? Yeah. Because they got deer there, so we'd all end up there at times. So I'd already been there. They didn't always get a deer, but I'd always been there 6-7 times. So they gave me 3/4 of an hour to get around, and I got into that little place. But I didn't think I could see good. So I got up, I moved forward a little bit. I'd say 10 yards, and I got up on a stump. It was about that big, and I could barely get up on it. It's probably that high. I got up on it, and he decided to stand there, right in the open. And so after a little while, all of a sudden, I see this doe coming down, and my eyes were glued to it. She came down from me to your knee, and I was scared. Like this, I don't know if I was shaking or what, and she turned her head over her back, was looking back up there. I looked up there, and here comes a buck. Holy shit. So what do I do? Well, I think that he might have smelled me or something, and she hadn't. And then all of a sudden, just like this, she bolted. But she turned and went this way here, and the buck stood there. So I had my mother's 32-40 Winchester lever action, and I can't get planted very good. I get turned around, take careful aim, and I shoot, and nothing happens. So the deer doesn't move. So I work the action, and I jam the next shell in, and the deer doesn't run. So I get the gun freed up, and get it back together, and I shoot again. The deer doesn't move. I do the same thing again. The deer still hasn't run. The doe has stopped over here. And so the third time, he bolted. And he ran down by me. Of course, I didn't get a gun. And by the way, I pretty much fell off that time off the stump. And the other times, and so not long after, everybody converged on me, my father and my uncles and my cousin, and they get down there. And Uncle Gordon got to me first, and he says, "What happened?" So I tell him. He said, "Okay, where were you? You sitting by the firs?" And I can't lie to him, so I tell him no. Okay, he didn't give me shit. He just, okay, tell me where it went. We don't have any snow, so he goes over, and I'm sure he found where it was running, and my father comes along. So then, after a while, my cousin's there and stuff, and finally, Gordon can't find any blood, and he finally comes up, and my father asked me what happened, and so I told him, and then he said, "Well, did you think about putting your bracing your arms?" Because he knew I was small, and I said, I was standing on that stump. And he said, "What?" He started to give me a little grief, Nothing bad, but I remember to this day him saying, "Well, my uncle's coming up." He said, "Well, I guess that's an example of sending a boy to do a man's job." My uncle said, "Bill Green," loud, that was his younger brother, not as big as my dad. He said, "Shut up." And my dad said, "Well, he said, I said, shut up." And my father goes, "Well, okay, I'll tell you what. Del, you want to know what your father did once?" My father said, "What the heck are you talking about? What are you going to tell him now? Remember at the barn when we were kids? You don't need to hear that." So Uncle Gordon told me about, he said, we had Ma's old 32-20, I think he said it. He said there was a big buck out behind the barn, and we snuck around, and we got our gun, and your father had, I don't remember, like 7 shells, and he shot at this buck standing still 7 times, and he missed it every time. And he said, "Right, Bill?" And my dad kind of smiled and said, "Well, maybe, He says, "And then what?" He don't need to hear that. And he said, "We had one more shot." And he said, "I grabbed the gun and put it in there, and I shot the buck." So if you want to embarrass somebody there, we're even. So my father laughed, and patted me on the back. Yeah.
That's too funny.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to do. A lot of area around them.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. I notice as we tell stories here, we don't always get the deer, and it's just part of why we do it.
That's why we do it. Brings you back.
Keeps you coming back for more,
Jesus, I guess.
And it's something about the Northwoods or the big woods, right? Like, as we sit where we are, you've got deer all around you, and the first thing you told me when we walked through the door was, there's deer all over. I've never deer hunted here in my life.
No, I never have.
It just,
No.
there's more meaning to where you're hunting in the actual hunt, right?
Well, how about how disappointed you are when you're hunting and you bump into a deer hunter? Just one?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. True story.
Yeah.
So, well, should we wrap this thing up? It's been a pleasure.
It's been
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah,
It has.
definitely has. So,
Great to have both of you.
yeah, it sure is.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you for getting on. All right, guys. Till the next one.